The wagon wheels had stopped turning 3 days ago when Jacob Miller decided he'd had enough. Eleanor watched him pack his meager belongings into a worn leather satchel, his movements deliberate and final. 23 years of life had taught her to recognize the signs of a man preparing to leave, the way they avoided eye contact, how their hands moved with sudden purpose, the set of their jaw that said the decision was already made. "You're not worth the trouble," Jacob said, not bothering to look at her as he buckled his saddlebags. "Should have listened to my mother. She warned me about taking in strays." Eleanor didn't flinch. She'd heard worse from her own father before he'd sold her to the Millers as an indentured servant when she was 14. The word sold was never used. Of course, they called it an arrangement for her betterment. But everyone knew what it meant when a girl was sent to work in another man's house with no wages and no way home. The Kansas dust swirled around them, coating everything in a fine layer of grit. Their small homestead, if 2 rooms of rough-hewn logs could be called that, sat like a wound on the prairie. She'd spent 4 years trying to make it a home, planting vegetables that withered in the summer heat, mending clothes until the fabric was more patched than original, cooking meals from whatever Jacob managed to hunt or trade for. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice steady despite the hollow feeling spreading through her chest. "California, maybe, or back east. Anywhere but here." He finally looked at her then, and she saw nothing in his eyes. No regret, no affection, not even anger, just emptiness. "The house is paid through the month. After that," he shrugged. "After that, she'd be another abandoned woman on the frontier, too poor to pay for lodging, too unmarried to be respectable, too worn to attract another man's charity." The math was simple and cruel. She thought of her mother, dead these 15 years, who used to brush her hair and tell her she was pretty. "Pretty girls find good husbands," she'd said, as if beauty was currency and marriage a transaction. But Eleanor's prettiness, if it had ever existed, had been scrubbed away by lye soap and prairie sun, by nights spent crying into thin pillows, and days spent pretending not to notice how Jacob looked through her instead of at her. He left at dawn, taking the good horse and leaving her the mare with the lame foreleg. She stood in the doorway and watched him disappear into the horizon, a dark speck swallowed by the endless grass. The neighbors would talk. She knew. Mrs. Henderson would cluck her tongue and say she'd seen it coming. Mr. Patterson would spit tobacco and mutter about women who couldn't keep their men satisfied. But they didn't know about the baby she'd lost last winter, how Jacob had been relieved rather than grieved. They didn't know about the nights he'd come home drunk from town, stinking of another woman's perfume, climbing into their bed like she was just another piece of furniture. They didn't know how she'd learned to make herself small, to take up less space, to need less food, less warmth, less love, until she sometimes wondered if she was disappearing entirely. The truth was simpler than they could imagine. She had never been loved. Not by her father, who saw her as a burden to be passed off. Not by her mother, who died before teaching her what love looked like. Not by Jacob, who had wanted a workhorse and a warm body and found her lacking in both. A week after Jacob left, she sold the mare to a traveling merchant for half what it was worth and used the money to buy passage with a wagon train heading west. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Samuel Hartley, looked her up and down with calculating eyes. "You got family where we're heading?" he asked. "No." "Friends?" "No." "Then why you going?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Because staying here means dying slowly. At least going somewhere else means dying with a view." He'd laughed at that, a harsh bark that sounded like surprise. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you mend?" "Yes." "Can you shoot?" "No, but I can learn." That's what they all say. But he took her money and assigned her to help the Wheelers, an elderly couple whose own daughters had married and stayed back east. The wagon train left Independence, Missouri on a Tuesday morning in April. 43 wagons, nearly 200 souls. all chasing something they couldn't name but hoped to recognize when they found it. Eleanor walked alongside the Wheeler wagon. Her few possessions, 2 dresses, a Bible she couldn't read, her mother's wooden comb wrapped in an oilcloth bundle. She learned the rhythm of the trail quickly. Up before dawn to start the fires, coffee boiling while the men hitched the oxen, breakfast of biscuits and salt pork, eaten standing up. Walk 15 miles, stop for a cold lunch, walk another 10, circle the wagons at dusk, cook dinner over buffalo chips when wood was scarce, fall into exhausted sleep to the sound of coyotes and wind. The other women watched her with suspicious eyes at first. A woman alone was either running from something or towards something, and either way spelled trouble. But gradually, as she proved herself useful, her stitches were neat. Her biscuits didn't break teeth. She never complained about the dust or the heat or the endless walking. They began to thaw. Mary Wheeler took to her first, perhaps recognizing something of her own younger self in Eleanor's quiet determination. "I was 17 when I married Mr. Wheeler," she said one evening as they scraped plates clean with sand. "Didn't love him then. Respect came first, then fondness, then something that might be called love. Given enough years." "How many years?" Eleanor asked. Mary smiled, her face a map of sun-worn lines. "I'll let you know when I'm sure." But Eleanor watched the way Mary's hand found her husband's shoulder when she passed, the way he saved the softest part of the bread for her, how they moved around each other with the practiced ease of dancers who knew all the steps. That was love, she thought. Not the desperate passion of dime novels, but something quieter, steadier, built from countless small kindnesses. She saw it in the other families, too. The Johnsons with their 5 children, the youngest still nursing, the oldest already learning to drive the oxen. The Kowalskis, Polish immigrants who spoke broken English but whose eyes said everything when they looked at each other. Even the Brennans, who fought like cats and dogs, had a fierce loyalty that showed in how quickly they united against any outside threat. And every night, as Eleanor lay on the hard ground, staring at stars that seemed both closer and farther away than they'd ever been, she felt the emptiness inside her grow. Not hunger. She'd known hunger. Not fatigue. She'd known bone-deep exhaustion. This was different. This was the absence of something she'd never had but somehow missed, like a phantom pain in a limb she'd been born without. "I have never known love," she whispered to the stars one night, the words escaping before she could stop them. The vastness of the prairie swallowed her confession, and she was grateful. Some truths were too heavy to speak in daylight, too sharp to share with others. But here, in the darkness between one life and whatever came next, she could admit what she'd always known. She was 23 years old, and no one had ever chosen her for herself. She was the burden passed off, the arrangement made, the abandoned wife, the charity case. She was utility without value, existence without meaning, a person shaped entirely by what she lacked rather than what she possessed. The wagon train pressed on, following the Platte River, chasing the promise of Oregon's green valleys and California's gold fields. Eleanor walked until her feet bled, then wrapped them in rags and walked some more. She was going west not because she believed in new beginnings, but because she had exhausted all her endings. She was a ghost already. Might as well haunt a place she'd never been disappointed by. Little did she know that 500 miles ahead, where the trail split between safe passage and Apache territory, her emptiness would meet someone else's fullness, and the collision would change everything she thought she knew about love, about choice, about what it meant to be seen and held and valued. But for now, she walked, one foot in front of the other, carrying her loneliness like a stone in her chest, unaware that sometimes the deepest loves come to those who have given up looking for them. The dust never stopped. It coated everything, wagons, oxen, people, until the whole train looked like it had been carved from the earth itself. Eleanor had given up trying to keep her dress clean after the first week. Now, 6 weeks into the journey, she looked like everyone else, sunburnt, wind-chapped, aged by the trail in ways that had nothing to do with years. They'd lost 2 wagons at the Platte River crossing. The Hendersons' wagon had tipped, spilling their lives into the muddy current. Eleanor had watched Mrs. Henderson weep over her grandmother's china, scattered and broken among the river rocks. Mr. Henderson had put his arm around his wife and said, "It's just things. Martha, we've still got each other." Eleanor had turned away from their embrace, busying herself with helping salvage what could be saved. Their loss was material. Hers was something else entirely. You couldn't mourn what you'd never had, but apparently you could ache for it just the same. The trail stretched before them like a dusty ribbon, sometimes following rivers, sometimes cutting across plains so vast they seemed to curve with the earth itself. Eleanor walked until walking became as automatic as breathing, her body moving without conscious thought while her mind wandered. She noticed things now that she might have missed before. The way young Sarah Johnson lit up when the Turner boy rode past on his horse. How Mrs. Kowalski hummed Polish lullabies while she worked. Songs that needed no translation to understand they were about love and loss. The careful way Mr. Wheeler carved a walking stick for his wife when her rheumatism acted up, spending his precious evening hours smoothing the wood until it fit her hand perfectly. "You're too quiet," Mary Wheeler said one evening as they prepared supper. The older woman's hands were steady as she mixed cornmeal with the last of their fresh water. "A woman needs to talk sometimes. Let the poison out." "I've got no poison," Eleanor replied, slicing salt pork into thin strips. "Just emptiness." Mary studied her with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by simple words. Emptiness can be its own kind of poison. Child. Eats at you from the inside. Eleanor wanted to explain that she'd been hollow so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be full. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she watched the Turner boy bring Sarah Johnson a handful of prairie flowers, watched the girl blush and smile, watched something begin between them that Eleanor recognized but couldn't name from experience. The nights were the hardest. After the cooking and cleaning, after the children were settled and the fires banked, families retreated into their wagons or tents. Eleanor lay under the Wheeler wagon, staring up at the weathered boards, listening to the sounds of intimacy she'd never really known. Not the physical act, she'd endured that with Jacob often enough, but the whispered conversations, the quiet laughter, the comfortable silences that spoke of partnership. Sometimes she walked the perimeter of the camp, ostensibly checking that the fires were properly banked, but really just moving to escape the weight of her thoughts. The guards knew her now, nodded as she passed. "Can't sleep, Mrs. Miller," they'd ask, and she'd smile and lie about worrying over tomorrow's river crossing or the dwindling flour supply. She'd kept Jacob's name, though he'd abandoned her, because a woman needed a marriage in her past, even a failed one, to explain her presence on the trail. A widow might be pitied. A spinster was suspicious. An abandoned wife occupied a strange middle ground, unfortunate but understandable. One night, she found herself at the edge of camp where the light barely reached. The prairie stretched out endless and dark, and for a moment she considered walking into it, letting the vastness swallow her whole. What difference would it make who would mourn Eleanor Miller, who wasn't even really a Miller, who wasn't really anything to anyone? Dangerous thoughts on a night like this. Eleanor startled. Samuel Hartley stood nearby, his pipe glowing red in the darkness. The wagon master moved like a cat despite his size, years of frontier life teaching him to walk soft. "Just thinking," she said. "Seen that kind of thinking before." He drew on his pipe, the smoke disappearing into the night air. "Lost a woman on the California Trail 2 years back. She walked into the desert one night, left a note saying she was tired of being empty. Her husband found her 3 days later." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, though the night was warm. Did he mourn her? Hard to say. He remarried in Sacramento before the year was out. Hartley's voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. Point is, the desert don't care about empty or full. It'll kill you either way. But at least with the living, there's a chance of change. You ever been empty, Mr. Hartley? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, once, lost my wife and boy to fever back in a 41. Thought about ending it more times than I could count. But I kept moving, kept breathing. And one day I realized the emptiness had shifted. Not filled exactly, but changed shape. Became something I could carry instead of something that carried me. They stood in comfortable silence. Two people who understood that some wounds never healed, just scarred over enough to bear weight. The next morning brought trouble. One of the oxen had died in the night, Johnson's best puller, and they had to redistribute the weight among the remaining animals. It meant lightning loads, making hard choices about what to keep and what to leave behind. Eleanor watched families sort through their possessions with growing desperation. Books, furniture, tools, things that had seemed essential in independence now became ballast to be shed. Misses. Patterson wept over her mother's rocking chair. The Brennan children begged to keep their toys. Everyone had something they couldn't bear to lose, until they had to. She had so little that losing more seemed impossible. But Mary Wheeler asked her to go through her small bundle anyway. Every pound matters now, the older woman said apologetically. Eleanor spread her possessions on a blanket. 2 dresses, both patched and repatched. Her mother's Bible, unread but carried like a talisman. The wooden comb, teeth broken but still functional. A tiny mirror Jacob had given her early in their marriage, back when he still pretended to care. She picked up the mirror, saw her face reflected in its scratched surface. Sun had darkened her skin, and wind had etched fine lines around her eyes. She looked older than her 23 years, worn down like river rock. The face that stared back was a stranger's, not the pretty girl her mother had hoped would find a good husband, not the wife Jacob had grudgingly taken, not anybody she recognized. Without hesitation, she tossed the mirror onto the pile of things to be left behind. Then the Bible, which had brought no comfort and couldn't be read anyway. She kept one dress, the comb, and nothing else. Mary Wheeler watched with worried eyes. You're sure? They're just things. Eleanor echoed Mr. Henderson's words, though she owned so little that everything should have been precious. But what was the point of carrying reminders of a life that had never really been hers? As they prepared to move out, she saw her mirror half buried in the pile of abandoned possessions, cracked now from how she'd thrown it. Good, she thought. Let it reflect someone else's emptiness. The train moved slower now, animals struggling with even the lightened loads. They were in dangerous territory. Indian country, the men said, voices dropping as if the very words might summon trouble. Guards doubled, weapons checked and rechecked. Children were kept close to the wagons, women discouraged from wandering. Eleanor felt the fear that rippled through the camp, but couldn't make herself share it. What was death but another kind of emptiness? At least it would be final, conclusive. An end to the constant ache of wanting something she couldn't name and wouldn't recognize if she found it. But she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, because that's what the living did. She helped Mary with the cooking, mended clothes for families who'd lost too much, held crying children when their mothers were too exhausted to comfort them. She existed in the spaces between other people's lives, useful but not essential, present but not seen. And every night, she stared at the stars and wondered if somewhere under this same sky, someone else was empty too. If maybe that was just the human condition, all of them walking around hollow, filling the space with noise and motion and the illusion of purpose, but empty just the same. She didn't know that 3 days hence, the illusion of safety would shatter like her abandoned mirror, and in the breaking, something new would begin. She didn't know that emptiness could be filled by the most unexpected things, or that sometimes love came not as gentle rain, but as a storm that destroyed everything you thought you knew. For now, she just walked, dust-covered and bone-tired, a ghost among the living, carrying her emptiness across the endless plains toward a destiny she couldn't imagine and wouldn't have believed if someone had told her. The attack came with the dawn. Eleanor woke to screaming, not the ordinary cries of children or the shouts of men wrestling stubborn oxen, but the high, terrible sound of mortal fear. Gunfire cracked like thunder across the camp. Horses whinnied in panic, the air filled with dust and smoke and the acrid smell of black powder. She rolled from under the wheeler wagon just as an arrow thudded into the wood where her head had been. Around her, the camp exploded into chaos. Men grabbed rifles, firing at shadows that moved like smoke through the early morning mist. Women dragged children into wagons, throwing themselves over the smallest ones. "Circle up, circle the wagons," Samuel Hartley's voice boomed above the din. But it was too late. The attackers had come in the pre-dawn darkness, positioned themselves perfectly. Now they swept through the camp like a violent wind. Eleanor saw Mr. Wheeler struggling to reload his rifle, his arthritic hands shaking. Without thinking, she crawled to him, helped steady the weapon. A rider thundered past, war paint making his face a mask of red and black. The shot went wide. "Get to safety," Wheeler shouted at her. But where was safety in this maelstrom? The Johnson's wagon was on fire. She saw Mrs. Johnson stumble out, her hair singed, clutching the baby. 2 of her other children followed. But where were the rest? Eleanor started toward them, but a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back just as a horse and rider plunged through the space where she'd been. It was Mary Wheeler, her face set in grim determination. "Stay low, stay close," the older woman commanded, dragging Eleanor toward their wagon. But the wagon offered no sanctuary. Arrows bristled from its canvas sides like quills. Inside, she could hear someone sobbing, the Kowalski girl they'd taken in when her parents' wagon had been abandoned. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Eleanor pressed against the wagon wheel, making herself small, watching the violence unfold with a strange detachment. Death had come calling, and part of her wondered why she was trying so hard to avoid it. Hadn't she walked to the edge of camp just nights ago, contemplating the peace of oblivion? Then she saw Sarah Johnson. The girl who'd blushed at prairie flowers was running between wagons, searching frantically for something. Someone. The Turner boy. Eleanor could see him trapped beneath an overturned water barrel, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Sarah was trying to reach him when a mounted warrior appeared from the smoke, weapon raised. Eleanor moved without conscious thought. She grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the scattered cooking supplies and ran, placing herself between Sarah and the descending blow. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, dropping her to her knees, but it deflected the strike enough for Sarah to pull Turner to relative safety. The warrior wheeled his horse, and Eleanor found herself looking up into a face that would haunt her, not because it was savage, as the stories always said, but because it was so unexpectedly young. He couldn't have been more than 16. This boy playing at war. Their eyes met for a heartbeat that lasted forever. Then a gunshot cracked nearby, and the young warrior jerked, clutching his shoulder. He wheeled his horse and vanished into the dust and confusion. Eleanor remained on her knees, the skillet still clutched in her trembling hands, until someone pulled her behind an overturned wagon. The attack ended as suddenly as it began. War cries faded into the distance, replaced by the moans of the wounded and the crackling of fires. Eleanor emerged to find a scene from hell itself. 3 wagons burned beyond saving. Bodies lay scattered. She counted 7 dead, though others might have been carried off. The Johnson family had lost 2 children. Old Mr. Patterson sat cradling his wife's body, rocking back and forth. The survivors moved like sleepwalkers, putting out fires, tending wounds, counting the living and the dead. Eleanor found herself working alongside Dr. Marcus, the closest thing they had to a physician, though he was really just a barber who'd learned some field medicine in the Mexican War. "Hold him still," Marcus ordered as they worked on a man with an arrow in his thigh. Eleanor braced the patient, one of the Murphy brothers, while the doctor cut the shaft and pushed it through. The man screamed and passed out. which was a mercy. "You've got steady hands," Marcus noted.
"Ever done any doctoring?"
"No," Eleanor replied, though she'd patched Jacob up often enough after his drunken fights.
"Just used to blood."
They worked through the morning, treating what wounds they could. Eleanor learned that gut wounds meant death, just slower. That head wounds bled fierce but might heal clean. That the real killer would be infection. Days from now, when the excitement faded and fever set in. It was past noon when Mary Wheeler found her. Eleanor was washing blood from her hands in a bucket that had already turned red. The older woman looked haggard, aged a decade in hours. "You saved the Johnson girl," Mary said quietly. Eleanor shrugged. "Anyone would have."
"No, they wouldn't have."
Mary studied her with those two knowing eyes.
"You moved like someone who didn't care if you lived or died. That's its own kind of courage, I suppose, or its own kind of sickness."
Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion arose near the southern edge of camp. Men were shouting, rifles raised. She and Mary hurried over to find a crowd gathered around someone, on the ground. It was a warrior, but not like the ones who'd attacked. This man was older, perhaps 30, with 3 bullet wounds painting his chest red. He was unconscious but breathing, and wore different markings than the raiders. His horse lay dead nearby, and it was clear he'd been fleeing something or someone.
"Apache," one of the men spat. "Different tribe than what hit us, but savage all the same."
"Kill him now," another urged. "Save us the trouble later."
"He's wounded and unconscious."
"Doctor," Marcus pushed through the crowd. "We're not murderers."
"Tell that to the Johnsons," someone shouted. "Their babies are dead because of his kind."
The argument escalated, voices rising with the afternoon heat. Eleanor found herself staring at the wounded man, even bloody and unconscious. There was something distinctive about his face, a strength in the jaw, a nobility in the features that transcended the circumstances. His hands, she noticed, were scarred but clean, the fingers long and surprisingly gentle-looking for a warrior.
"I'll tend him," she heard herself say.
The crowd turned to her in surprise.
"You lost your mind, woman?"
This from Mr. Henderson, his face still gray with shock from the morning's violence.
"Doctor, Marcus is needed for our own people," Eleanor said steadily. "I can clean wounds and change bandages. If he dies, he dies. If he lives—"
She shrugged.
"Then we decide what to do."
It was practical enough to appeal to their pragmatism, cold enough to satisfy their need for vengeance. After more argument, Hartley made the decision. The Apache would be placed in one of the damaged wagons, away from the main camp. Eleanor would tend him, with guards posted. If he showed signs of recovering enough to be a threat, they'd revisit the matter. They carried him to the broken Peterson wagon, its wheels shattered but frame intact enough for shelter. Eleanor gathered what medical supplies she could beg or borrow, mostly torn sheets for bandages and a bottle of whiskey for cleaning wounds. As the sun began its descent, she found herself alone with the enemy. He lay on a makeshift pallet, his breathing shallow but steady. She'd seen death enough to know he walked that knife's edge, could tip either way. She began with the wounds, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal the damage. 3 bullets, all on the right side. One had passed through clean, leaving an ugly but survivable hole. The other 2 were still lodged, one in the shoulder, one dangerously close to the lung. As she worked, she studied him. The scars on his body told stories she couldn't read, battles fought, survived, won or lost. His face in repose was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 25, though the life he'd lived had carved itself into his features like wind-carved stone. She was cleaning the shoulder wound when his eyes opened. Eleanor froze, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. She was alone with a warrior who, wounded or not, could probably kill her with those scarred hands. But his eyes, when they focused on her, held no violence, only pain and a wariness that she recognized. the look of someone who'd learned not to trust kindness. He said something in a language she didn't understand. When she didn't respond, he tried again in broken English. Water. She helped him drink from a canteen, supporting his head. This close. She could smell sage and smoke and something else. Something wild and free that made her heart beat faster for reasons she didn't understand. Why? He asked when he'd drunk his fill. The single word carried many questions. Because you're hurt, she said simply. And I know what it's like to be abandoned by my own kind. He studied her for a long moment, those dark eyes seeing more than she'd intended to reveal. Then he closed them again, either sleeping or feigning sleep to avoid more questions. Eleanor continued her work as darkness fell. The camp was subdued, still reeling from the morning's attack. She could hear prayers being said over the dead, children crying for parents who wouldn't answer, the low murmur of men planning revenge. And here she sat, tending the enemy. Though he wasn't the enemy who'd attacked them, it was a distinction that mattered to her if no one else. She'd seen his face when he'd opened his eyes, not the face of a killer, but of a man in pain, confused to find himself at the mercy of those his people called enemies. As she wrapped the last bandage, he spoke again, so quietly she almost missed it. You are empty, he said in that careful, broken English. Not a question, a statement of recognition. Eleanor's hand stilled. What? Here. He moved his hand slightly, placing it over his heart, then gestured weakly toward her. Empty, like hole that cannot fill. She stared at him, this stranger who'd seen in minutes what Jacob had never noticed in years. Yes, she whispered. The admission scraped raw from her throat. I know this, Empty, he said. Then his eyes closed again, and this time she could tell he truly slept. Eleanor sat back on her heels, shaken. In all her life, no one had ever looked at her and simply seen. Not what she could do for them, not what they could take from her, but the fundamental truth of her existence, this Apache warrior, meeting her eyes across culture and language and the violence of the morning, had recognized her in a way no one else ever had. She pulled a blanket over him, checking his breathing one more time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The camp would demand answers, demand justice, demand his death. But tonight, in this broken wagon at the edge of a shattered camp, two empty souls had recognized each other across an impossible divide. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor felt the faintest stirring of something that might, impossibly, be hope. The fever came on the second night. Eleanor had been expecting it. Infection was the real killer on the frontier, more deadly than bullets or arrows. She'd seen it take strong men who'd survived the initial wound, watched them burn up from the inside while loved ones stood helpless. Now she watched it take hold of the Apache warrior, his bronze skin flushing hot, his breathing becoming labored. She did what she could. Wet cloths on his forehead, spoonfuls of water when he could manage them, the last of the whiskey to clean the wounds again, though she knew it was probably too late. The guards outside the broken wagon watched her tend him with expressions ranging from disgust to bewilderment. Waste of time, Tom Morrison said when he brought her the evening meal, hardtack and beans, the same as everyone else despite their losses. Should have let us finish him that first day. Eleanor didn't argue. She'd learned long ago that defending her choices only invited more criticism. Instead, she simply took the plate and returned to her patient. On the third night, his fever broke in a drenching sweat that soaked through the blankets. Eleanor was dozing against a wagon wall when she heard him stirring. In the dim light of a single candle, she saw his eyes were clear for the first time since she'd begun tending him. You stayed, he said, his English still careful but stronger. Someone had to. She helped him sit up slightly, offering water. What's your name? He was quiet for a long moment, perhaps weighing whether to trust her with even that much. Finally, Joseph. She almost smiled. That's not your real name. Name whites gave me at mission school. His mouth twisted slightly. Before I left to go back to my people. Real name. He said something in Apache that sounded like music and thunder combined. You cannot say it.
Joseph, then,
she settled back against the wagon wall.
I'm Eleanor.
Eleanor. He tested the name carefully. Why do you save me? Your people want me dead. They're not my people. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. I just travel with them. Joseph studied her in that unnerving way he had, as if he could read the stories written in her bones. The empty, he said finally. It is because no one sees you. Eleanor's throat tightened.
I've been invisible my whole life.
Not invisible. He shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. Unseen, different thing. Invisible is hiding. Unseen is, he searched for words, is when others have no eyes for your spirit. She thought about Jacob, looking through her father, seeing only a mouth to feed. Even kind Mary Wheeler, who saw her as a useful pair of hands, but not much more.
Yes, that's it exactly.
They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, she could hear the night guards changing shift, the low murmur of voices. The camp had been tense since the attack, half the people wanting to press on to Fort Laramie, the other half insisting they go back. Hartley had kept them moving forward through sheer force of will, but progress was slow with their reduced numbers and damaged wagons. Your husband, Joseph asked suddenly. He is dead. No. Eleanor found herself telling this stranger what she'd never told anyone else. He left, said I wasn't worth the trouble of keeping. Joseph made a sound that might have been disgust. Among my people, a man who abandons his woman is, he said a word in Apache that needed no translation. Not a man at all. Among my people, an abandoned woman is damaged goods. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter. That's why I'm here. Nowhere else to go. I know this feeling. Joseph shifted slightly, grimacing. My wife died 2 winters past. Sickness took her and our son. My people say I should take new wife, make new family. But they don't understand that empty doesn't feel that easy. Eleanor finished. He looked at her sharply, then nodded. Yes, this exactly. Over the next days, as Joseph slowly healed, they developed an odd routine. Eleanor would tend his wounds, bring him food, help him with the necessities of recovery. In return, he taught her words in Apache, told her stories of his people, shared a world she'd never imagined. Your people think we are savage, he said one evening as she changed his bandages. The wounds were closing clean, no more sign of infection. But we have laws, families, love, just different from yours. How did you learn English? Eleanor asked, partly from curiosity and partly to distract him from the pain. Mission school. When I was boy, priests said they would save our souls. His laugh was harsh. They tried to kill everything Apache in us, cut our hair, beat us for speaking our language, told us our ways were evil. Some believed them. I learned their words but kept my spirit. Eleanor thought about her own education, or lack thereof. I can't read. My mother died before she could teach me, and my father didn't see the point for a girl. I teach you. Joseph offered. Words are power. Your people write everything down, make it law. You should know these marks they make. It was an impossible offer. He would be gone soon, either escaped or hanged, depending on how things went. But Eleanor found herself accepting anyway. That night, he taught her to write her own name in the dirt floor of the wagon, guiding her hand with his. Eleanor, he sounded out slowly. It means light. Does it? She stared at the letters she'd made. I've never felt like light, more like shadow. Shadow cannot exist without light, Joseph said quietly. Maybe you have been shadow so long, you forget you are also light. The camp's hostility toward Joseph grew as he recovered. Men muttered about keeping a savage so close, even wounded. Women pulled their children away when Eleanor passed. as if her care of him was contaminating. Only doctor. Marcus supported her efforts, and that was purely from medical curiosity. "Remarkable healing," he said after examining Joseph. "These people must have strong constitutions."
"He's not these people," Eleanor said sharply. "He's a man. His name is Joseph."
Marcus raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. One night, a group of men came to the wagon. Eleanor recognized them as the ones who'd been pushing hardest for Joseph's death. Henderson, Morrison, a few others who'd lost family in the attack. They carried torches and rifles, faces set in grim determination. "Step aside, Mrs. Miller," Henderson said. "This has gone on long enough." Eleanor positioned herself in the wagon's entrance.
"He's done nothing to us. He wasn't part of the attack. He's Apache,"
Morrison spat. "That's enough." "Then you'll have to go through me." She saw their hesitation. It was one thing to kill an enemy warrior, another to harm a white woman, even one as questionable as Eleanor. Behind her, she heard Joseph struggling to stand. "No," she said without turning. "Stay down." "Eleanor," I said no. The standoff might have ended badly, but Hartley appeared, drawn by the commotion. The wagon master took in the scene with one glance and stepped between the mob and Eleanor. "Any man who harms Mrs. Miller or her patient answers to me," he said quietly. "We've had enough killing. Get back to your wagons." They dispersed reluctantly, but Eleanor knew it was only a temporary reprieve. She sat back down next to Joseph, shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "Why?" Joseph asked. "Why stand for me against your own?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, trying to understand it herself. "Because for the first time in my life, someone sees me, really sees me. Not what I can do, not what I should be, just me." She looked at him directly. "Do you know how rare that is to be seen?" Joseph reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused from years of weapons and reins, but gentle. "Among my people, when someone saves your life, you belong to each other, not as property, as—" he searched for the word, "as spirits that choose to walk together." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "No one's ever chosen me before. Then I choose you now." Joseph said simply, "Eleanor who brings light, Eleanor who stands between death and life, Eleanor who sees with true eyes." "I don't bring light," she whispered. "I've never known love. Joseph, not real love, not the kind that chooses and stays and sees. My mother died. My father sold me. My husband left. I'm 23 years old and no one has ever loved me for myself." Joseph's hand tightened on hers. "Then I will teach you." "How can you teach what I've never known?" "Same way you teach me letters. One mark at a time until they make words. One day at a time until they make meaning." He pulled her closer until she could rest her head on his shoulder. "I am Apache warrior. When I give my word, it is not wind. It is mountain. You have never known love. Then I will give you all of mine." Eleanor broke then, sobbing against this stranger who wasn't a stranger, this enemy who wasn't an enemy, this man who saw her emptiness and offered to fill it not with pretty words or false promises, but with the simple truth of choice. Outside, the camp slept uneasily, torn between fear and hatred and the stubborn need to survive. Inside the broken wagon, two broken people held each other, building something new from the pieces of their separate sorrows. It wasn't the love of storybooks. It was quieter, deeper, born from mutual recognition of wounds that might never fully heal, but could perhaps be shared. And for the first time since her mother's death, Eleanor felt the possibility of home, not in a place, not in a role, but in the steady heartbeat of someone who had chosen to see her and, seeing her truly, had chosen to stay. Joseph's people came for him on a morning when the mist hung low over the prairie. turning the world into something between dream and waking. Eleanor had risen early to check his wounds, a ritual that had become less necessary as he healed, but which neither of them seemed willing to abandon. She heard the horses before she saw them, a soft thunder of hooves, controlled and purposeful, different from the chaos of the raid. Joseph heard them too. His body tensed, then relaxed as he recognized something in the sound she couldn't understand. "My people," he said quietly. "They search for me." Eleanor's heart constricted. She'd known this moment would come, but knowing hadn't prepared her for the reality of loss rushing toward her across the grassland. "Will you go?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You come with me." "Joseph." "You come," he repeated, more firmly. "Nothing for you here, only empty spaces where people should see you." Through the broken wagon's canvas, Eleanor could see riders approaching, 5 Apache warriors, painted for travel rather than war. The camp was stirring, shouts of alarm rising, but the riders stopped well outside rifle range. One dismounted and walked forward, hands visible and empty. Hartley met him halfway, and Eleanor watched them talk, gestures doing as much work as words. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, Hartley returned to the wagon. "They want him back," the wagon master said unnecessarily. "Willing to trade for him, horses, buffalo robes, and more than fair." He looked at Eleanor. "They also say he can bring his woman if he chooses." Eleanor felt heat rise in her face. "I'm not his woman." "Aren't you?" Hartley's weathered face showed something that might have been kindness. "I've watched you these past weeks, Mrs. Miller. You've been more alive tending this Apache than I ever saw you on the trail. Maybe it's time to stop being what you're not and start being what you are." Joseph had managed to stand, leaning against the wagon for support. "She comes, or I stay." He told Hartley, "This is my word." "That's her choice to make," Hartley replied. He looked at Eleanor. "Well, it's a hard life with them, different from anything you've known. But then, the life you've known hasn't been too kind either." Eleanor looked around the camp, at the faces already turning away from her, at the wagons that would roll on without noticing her absence, at the life that had never really been hers. Then she looked at Joseph, standing proud despite his wounds, choosing her in front of everyone. "I need to gather my things," she said. She had so little that packing took mere minutes. The wooden comb, her one remaining dress, a blanket Mary Wheeler pressed on her despite Eleanor's protests. "You'll need it," the older woman said firmly. "And, Eleanor, it takes courage to choose love over safety. Don't let anyone tell you different." Eleanor hugged her, the first embrace she'd shared with another woman since her mother's death. Then she walked to where Joseph waited with his people's horses. The Apache who'd negotiated, Joseph's cousin, she learned later, helped her mount behind Joseph. She'd ridden before, but never like this, never with her arms around a man who'd chosen her, riding toward a life she couldn't imagine, but which had to be better than the one she was leaving. The camp watched them go in silence, some with relief, some with disgust, a few with something that might have been envy. Eleanor didn't look back. She'd spent her whole life looking back, measuring herself against what she'd lost. Now she looked forward, even if forward was uncertain. Joseph's people had made camp a day's ride from the wagon train. It was smaller than Eleanor had expected. Maybe 30 people, mostly women and children, the men having been killed in various conflicts with soldiers and settlers. They watched her arrival with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. An older woman approached as Joseph dismounted, helping Eleanor down. The woman said something sharp in Apache, gesturing at Eleanor with clear disapproval. Joseph replied calmly, but Eleanor caught her own name in his response. The woman, his aunt, Eleanor would learn, spat on the ground and stalked away. "She doesn't want me here," Eleanor said. "She will learn." Joseph replied, "Come." You must meet my grandmother." The grandmother was ancient, face mapped with years of sun and sorrow. She studied Eleanor with eyes that missed nothing, then spoke at length to Joseph. He translated, "She says you have the look of someone who knows loss. This is good. Only those who have lost can truly learn to hold." Over the following weeks, Eleanor began to understand what Hartley had meant about it being a hard life. Everything was different. How they cooked, how they slept, how they moved with the seasons and the buffalo. She had to learn it all from the beginning, like a child, enduring the laughter of actual children who found her mistakes amusing. But Joseph was patient. He taught her to prepare hides, to identify edible plants, to read the signs of weather in the sky. In the evenings, he continued teaching her letters, drawing in the dirt or charcoal on bark. She learned slowly, but she learned. "You have good hands." Running Deer, one of the younger women, told her one day as Eleanor struggled with beadwork. It was the first kind word any of the women had offered. "Strong, they will learn." Eleanor discovered that Apache women worked harder than she'd ever imagined. Up before dawn, sleeping after the men, constantly processing food, making clothing, maintaining the camp. But there was something different about their labor. It was valued, essential, recognized. When a woman spoke in council about matters affecting the camp, men listened. When Joseph's aunt, who still hadn't warmed to Eleanor, declared they should move camp to follow the herds, everyone prepared to go. "Your women have power," Eleanor told Joseph one evening as they sat by their fire. They had their own shelter now, a small teepee that Running Deer had helped her construct. "Women are life," Joseph said simply. "Men can bring death in hunt, in war, but women bring life, create, sustain, continue. This is power." Eleanor thought about her life before, how she'd been taught that women's work was lesser, that their voices didn't matter, that their worth lay only in their usefulness to men. Here, she watched mothers teaching daughters ancient skills with pride, saw women making decisions that affected everyone, witnessed the respect given to grandmothers whose word could override any warriors. But it wasn't paradise. Food was often scarce. The threat of soldiers was constant. Other tribes sometimes raided, and Joseph's people had to be ready to fight or flee at any moment. Eleanor learned to pack their entire home in minutes, to ride hard for hours without complaint, to make do with whatever the land provided. And there was still hostility toward her. Some of the people called her White Eyes and made signs against evil when she passed. Others simply pretended she didn't exist. Joseph protected her from the worst of it, but she felt the weight of being an outsider. One night, after a particularly difficult day when two women had refused to let her help with the communal cooking, Eleanor sat alone outside their teepee. The stars were brilliant, unmarred by any light but their fires. Joseph found her there. "You regret coming?" he said, not a question. "No." Eleanor was surprised to find it was true. "It's hard, being hated for what I am rather than who I am. But at least—" She searched for words. "At least here I exist. Even if they hate me, they see me. I'm not invisible." "Give them time," Joseph said, sitting beside her. "My people have lost much to yours. Trust comes hard." "I'm not my people," Eleanor said. "I'm just me." "I know this. They will learn." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you know why I chose you?" Eleanor shook her head. "When you came to tend me, I was ready to die, had decided to die. My wife, my son, gone. Nothing to hold me to this world. Then you came, and I saw in your eyes the same empty I carried. But you still tended me, still fought for me, still stood between me and death." He touched her face gently. "I thought, here is someone who understands that sometimes we must choose to live, even when living hurts. Here is someone who knows that empty can only be filled by choosing, again and again, to stay." Eleanor leaned into his touch. "I don't know how to be a wife. Jacob said I was a terrible one." Jacob was fool, Joseph said flatly. You are learning to be Apache wife. Different thing. Apache wife is partner, not servant, equal, not lesser. You learn this well. As summer turned toward autumn, Eleanor found her place slowly, carefully. Running Deer became a friend, teaching her the subtle customs she kept inadvertently violating. Joseph's grandmother began acknowledging her presence, even occasionally offering corrections to her work, a sign of acceptance. Running Deer assured her. She learned to find joy in small things, the taste of fresh buffalo meat after a successful hunt, the sound of children playing in the evening, the feel of Joseph's arms around her at night, holding her like she was something precious rather than something tolerated. One day, while gathering plants with Running Deer and 2 other women, they encountered a rattlesnake. Eleanor reacted without thinking, pushing Running Deer's young daughter away and killing the snake with her gathering stick. It was over in seconds, but when she looked up, the other women were staring at her differently. You have warrior heart, one of them said slowly, white skin, but warrior heart. After that, the hostility began to fade. Not quickly, not completely, but enough that Eleanor could breathe easier. She was given a name, Woman Who Stands Between, recognizing her protection of both Joseph and Running Deer's daughter. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a beginning. As the leaves began to turn, Joseph took her to a high hill overlooking their camp. The teepees looked small from here, the people moving like ants about their daily work. This is home now? He asked. Eleanor looked at the camp, at the wide sky, at the man beside her who had chosen her when no one else would. She thought of the wagon train, probably at Fort Laramie by now, of Jacob, likely remarried to someone more suitable, of the life she'd left behind that had never really been hers anyway. Home isn't a place, she said finally. It's choosing to stay, choosing to build, choosing to trust that empty can be filled if you let people in. Joseph smiled, and she realized she'd never seen him truly smile before. It transformed his face, made him look younger, lighter. You are learning, he said. I have a good teacher, Eleanor replied, one who gives all his love to fill what was empty. As they walked back down to camp together, Eleanor felt something she'd never experienced before, the sense of moving towards something rather than away. For the first time in her 23 years, she wasn't running from pain or searching for escape. She was simply walking home, to a place where she was seen, valued, chosen. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But it was real, and it was hers. And that was more than she'd ever dared to hope for. Winter came early that year, driving them to the sheltered valley where Joseph's people had wintered for generations. Eleanor had learned enough to help with the preparations, smoking meat, preparing hides, gathering the last of the medicinal plants before snow covered everything. She worked alongside the other women now, still marked as different by her pale skin and clumsy Apache, but no longer an outsider. The first challenge to her fragile belonging came from within the tribe, Black Crow. A warrior who'd lost his wife the previous winter began making his interest in Eleanor known. He would leave fresh game at their teepee, stand too close when she worked, speak to Joseph about her as if she were goods to be traded. He says you would have easier life with him, Joseph told her one evening, his voice carefully neutral. He has many horses. His first wife's family still provides for him. You would not have to work so hard. Eleanor looked up from the moccasins she was mending, her third attempt finally showing improvement. Is that what you want for me to have an easier life? I want you to choose truth. Joseph said, if you stay with me because you have nowhere else, that is empty choice. If you stay because this is where your spirit lives, that is full choice. Eleanor set aside her work and moved to sit beside him. Black Crow sees a white woman who might give him status, something different to own. You see me? How is that a choice? But the issue festered. Black Crow was persistent, and some of the elders began to murmur that perhaps it would be better. A white woman with a full Apache warrior rather than one still recovering from wounds, still finding his place again after loss. The tension came to a head during the winter hunt. Joseph insisted on going despite his still healing injuries, needing to prove himself capable. Eleanor watched him ride out with the other men, worry gnawing at her bones. Black Crow had smiled at her as he passed, a proprietary look that made her skin crawl. 3 days later, a rider came racing back to camp. The hunt had gone wrong. Buffalo stampede, men scattered, several missing, Joseph among them. Eleanor felt the world tilt. Running Deer gripped her arm, holding her upright as the rider gasped out details. Separated in the chaos. Horses lost. Men on foot in a blizzard that had come from nowhere. "I go look," Eleanor said, but hands held her back. "You cannot," Joseph's aunt said, not unkindly. "You do not know land. You die. Help no one." But as night fell with no sign of the missing hunters, Eleanor couldn't sit still. She paced the teepee, then the camp, earning looks of pity and speculation. Black Crow had returned safely. Of course, she saw him watching her, calculating. On the second night, he approached. "He is gone," Black Crow said bluntly. "The snow has taken him. You need new man now. I take you." "He's not gone," Eleanor said. "White woman needs protection. I give this. I need nothing from you." Black Crow's face hardened. "You think you Apache now, you nothing. White woman playing at being one of us. Without Joseph, you are nobody here." The words hit their mark. Eleanor felt the fragile structure of belonging she'd built begin to crack. Without Joseph, what was she who would want the white woman who'd chosen their enemy's life? But then Running Deer appeared, flanked by 2 other women. "She is woman who stands between," Running Deer said firmly. "She has earned her place." "She is white," Black Crow spat. "She has warrior heart," Joseph's grandmother said, emerging from the darkness. Eleanor hadn't heard her approach. "This matters more than skin." Black Crow retreated, but Eleanor saw the promise in his eyes. This wasn't over. The 3rd day dawned clear and bitter cold. Still no sign of Joseph or the other missing men. The camp began preparing for morning. Eleanor watched them gather the materials for the rituals and felt something fierce rise in her chest. That night, she made her choice. While the camp slept, she gathered supplies, dried meat, water, blankets, the rifle Joseph had been teaching her to use. She dressed in the warmest clothing she had and slipped out into the frozen darkness. She had paid attention during their travels, had learned to read sign and weather. Joseph had told her stories of where to find shelter, how to survive when caught in storms. Now she put that knowledge to use, heading toward the last place the hunters had been seen. The cold was brutal, like nothing she'd ever experienced. It burned her lungs, froze her eyelashes, turned her fingers numb despite the fur-lined gloves Running Deer had made for her. But she pressed on, following the buffalo trail. Looking for any sign, she found the first body at midday, one of the younger hunters, frozen solid. Eleanor said a prayer she remembered from childhood, mixed with Apache words Joseph had taught her. Then she continued searching. As afternoon shadows grew long, she found tracks, human, staggering, recent enough that the wind hadn't erased them. Hope flared in her chest as she followed them to a small cave cut into a hillside. Joseph was there, alive but barely. His lips were blue with cold. His body curled around itself for warmth. Another hunter lay beside him. Long Knife, also breathing but unconscious. Eleanor worked quickly. Fire first. She'd learned that from the women. Warmth was life on the prairie. She used precious matches from her pack, coaxing flame from dry grass and twigs gathered from the cave's depths. Then she heated water, forced it between Joseph's lips, wrapped him in the blankets she'd brought. "Eleanor," his voice was a whisper. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't?" She continued working, checking his hands and feet for frostbite, piling more fuel on the fire. Black Crow, Joseph started.
Is a fool,
Eleanor finished.
Now be quiet and let me save your life. Again.
Through the night, she tended both men. Longknife woke briefly, confused to find a white woman caring for him but too weak to protest. Eleanor kept the fire going, rationed the food and water, watched for signs of improvement or decline. As dawn broke, she heard horses. Fear spiked. Was it soldiers, raiders? Then she recognized the calls. Apache, search party. They found her standing guard at the cave entrance. Rifle ready. 2 men alive behind her who should have been dead. The rescue party stared in amazement, then burst into activity, preparing to transport the injured men back to camp. The return was a blur. Eleanor rode with Joseph, keeping him warm with her body heat, whispering to him when he drifted toward unconsciousness. The camp received them with joy and amazement. Women who had barely acknowledged her now touched her arms, murmuring blessings. Men nodded respect. But it was Joseph's grandmother who said what mattered. No more question, she announced loudly enough for all to hear. This one belongs. She risks death for our people. She is Apache in heart. This is final word. Black Crow stood at the edge of the crowd, his face dark with anger and something else, perhaps the beginning of respect. He would not challenge Joseph's claim again. As Joseph recovered, again under Eleanor's care, the story spread through not just their camp, but to other bands. The white woman who had warrior heart, who had walked into blizzard death to save Apache men, who chose their ways not from necessity, but from love. You could have died, Joseph said when he was strong enough to sit up. Yes, Eleanor agreed.
But you would have died without me. That was not acceptable.
Black Crow spoke truth. Partly, without me, your place here is harder. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, thinking, he was wrong. Though, I'm not nobody without you. I'm somebody who chooses to stand between death and the people I've claimed as mine. That doesn't change if you're here or gone. She looked at him directly. I chose this life not just for you, but for me, because here, I can be who I really am. Not what others expect, not what I should be, but truly myself. Joseph reached for her hand. Woman who stands between, good name, true name. The winter deepened, but Eleanor's place in the tribe was secure now. She had passed through fire and ice, had proven herself in ways that transcended blood or birth. When spring came, there would be a ceremony. Joseph's grandmother had decided a formal adoption, making Eleanor truly one of them. But for now, in the quiet of their teepee with snow falling softly outside, Eleanor sat with Joseph and felt the last of her emptiness fade. It hadn't been filled by him alone. She realized it had been filled by choosing, again and again, to stand between cultures, between life and death, between fear and love. In that space between, she had found herself. I told you I would teach you love, Joseph said quietly. You did, Eleanor agreed. But I think I taught myself too, by choosing it, by fighting for it, by refusing to let it go. Outside, Black Crow passed their teepee without stopping. His time of challenge was over. Eleanor had proven herself not as Joseph's woman, but as her own person who chose to stand beside him. In the end, that was stronger than any claim of ownership could ever be. The tribe slept peacefully around them, secure in their winter camp. And Eleanor, once empty, now full of purpose and belonging and the quiet, steady love of a man who saw her truly, finally understood what home meant. It wasn't the place. It wasn't even the people. Exactly. It was the choice to stay, to build, to become, and she had chosen well. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it arrived, it brought more than melting snow. Scouts reported soldier movements to the south, larger than usual patrols pushing into territories that had been Apache land since time beyond memory. The elders met in council, voices grave as they discussed whether to move camp or stand ground. Eleanor sat with the women, listening to the debate. Her Apache had improved enough to follow most of the conversation. The younger warriors wanted to fight, to drive the soldiers back as they had before. The older ones counseled caution. Their numbers were too few, their weapons no match for army rifles and cannon. Joseph spoke for a middle path. We move deeper into mountains. Make them come to us if they want war. Our knowledge of land is our strength. It was decided. Within days, the camp was packed and moving, following trails only the Apache knew. Eleanor rode beside Joseph, both of them watchful. She had learned to read the signs of danger, birds falling silent, horses growing nervous, the subtle wrongness that preceded violence. They had been in the new camp less than a week when Long Knife's son came racing in on a lathered horse. He'd been hunting with two others when they'd spotted a large force moving through the valley below. Soldiers, but also civilians, settlers, looking for land to claim. How many? Joseph asked. 2 hands of soldiers, the boy gasped. Maybe same of settlers, women, children with them. Eleanor felt her stomach clench. Settlers meant permanence, meant the government had decided this land was no longer Apache territory, meant war, whether the elders wanted it or not. That night, a raiding party attacked the soldier camp, not their banned young warriors from another group who decided diplomacy was dead. By morning, smoke columns rose from the valley, and Eleanor knew retaliation would come swift and brutal. It came 3 days later. Eleanor was gathering water with running deer when the shots started. They dropped their containers and ran, but the attack was coordinated, professional. Soldiers came from 3 directions, driving the people toward the center of camp. The children, running deer screamed, racing toward where the young ones had been playing. Eleanor followed, scooping up a toddler who stood frozen in terror. Bullets whined overhead like angry wasps. She saw Joseph near their teepee, his rifle speaking steadily as he and other warriors tried to hold a defensive line. But they were outnumbered, outgunned. Already she could see bodies falling, Black Crow among them, his challenge to Joseph ending in blood on the spring grass. Into the rocks, Joseph's grandmother commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. The women and children fled toward the boulder field behind the camp. Natural fortification, their only hope. Eleanor carried 2 children. Running deer dragged a third. Behind them, the warriors fought a desperate retreat, trading space for time. She glanced back to see Joseph helping Long Knife, who'd taken a bullet in the leg. They made it to the rocks just as the soldiers overran the camp. Eleanor pushed the children into a crevice, then turned to see Joseph stumbling up the slope. Blood covered his right side, his face gray with pain. "No," she breathed, catching him as he fell. "No, not again." "Just graze," he gasped. But she could see it was more. The bullet had gone deep, possibly into the lung. The soldiers had stopped at the edge of the rocks, unwilling to pursue into terrain where Apache defenders had advantage. Eleanor could hear an officer shouting orders, organizing a siege rather than assault. They had time, but not much. "We need to stop the bleeding," she said, tearing strips from her skirt. Around her, other women tended wounded, comforted children, prepared what defense they could. Joseph caught her hands. "Eleanor, listen." "Save your breath," she ordered, but he shook his head. "If I fall, you must choose. They will offer safety to whites. You could go." "Stop!" The word came out harsh. "Don't you dare tell me to leave. Not now. Not after everything." "I want you to live," he whispered. "Then live with me." Eleanor shot back. "You promised to teach me love. You think love means abandoning you when you need me most. You taught me better than that." She worked over his wound with desperate efficiency, using everything the Apache women had taught her about battlefield medicine. The bleeding slowed, but didn't stop. Joseph drifted in and out of consciousness while Eleanor held him. whispering fierce promises and gentle threats in equal measure. As the sun peaked overhead, a voice called from below. "Inhabitants of this camp, I am Colonel Marcus Richardson of the United States Army. You are harboring hostiles who attacked peaceful settlers. Surrender now, and you will be treated fairly." Joseph's grandmother spat. "Fairly? Like they treated my son fairly when they shot him at peace talks. Like they treated my daughter fairly when they—" She broke off, old grief too sharp for words. Another voice called out, and Eleanor's blood froze. She recognized it. "Henderson, from the wagon train. Mrs. Miller, Eleanor Miller. We know you're up there. You've been held captive by these savages long enough. Come down and we'll ensure your safe return to civilization." Murmurs ran through the Apache women. Some looked at Eleanor with renewed suspicion. Was this a trap? Had she been waiting for rescue all along? Eleanor stood slowly, Joseph's blood still on her hands. She walked to where she could see the soldiers below, Henderson standing with them, his face a mask of righteous certainty. "Mr. Henderson," she called down, "I see you made it to wherever you were going." "Eleanor, thank God, come down immediately. You're safe now." "Safe," Eleanor laughed, the sound bitter. "I am safe. I'm with my family." "Those savages aren't your family. They kidnapped you, forced you to... We're here to rescue you. No one forced me anywhere. I chose this life. These people are mine, and I am theirs." "You don't know what you're saying. You've been brainwashed, abused." "The only abuse I've known was from white men who saw me as property," Eleanor interrupted. "My father, who sold me, my husband, who abandoned me. Men like you, who think they know what's best for women without asking. I stand with the Apache because they see me as a person, not a possession to be rescued or claimed." Richardson's voice cut through. "Ma'am, I'm ordering you to come down. You're a white woman, a citizen. It's my duty to secure your safety." "Then I renounce it." Eleanor called back, "Whatever citizenship means, I want no part of it if it means betraying people who showed me the only real love I've ever known." She turned to walk back, but Henderson's voice stopped her. "They'll hang him. You know your Apache lover. They'll hang him and make you watch. Is that what you want?" Eleanor looked back at Joseph, conscious now and watching her with eyes full of pain and pride. Then at the other Apache running deer holding her children, the grandmother standing straight despite her age, long knife bleeding but defiant, her family, her choice. "I want you to leave us in peace," she said. "But since that's not going to happen, I'll stand with them for whatever comes. That's what love means, Mr. Henderson. Standing together when the world wants to tear you apart." She walked back to Joseph, ignoring Henderson's continued shouts about rescue and duty and the proper place of white women. Joseph reached up weakly to touch her face. "You could have gone," he whispered. "Where would I go?" Eleanor asked. "You are my home. These people are my people. You think I survived being empty all those years just to choose emptiness again?" The siege continued through the afternoon. Shots were exchanged, but neither side could gain advantage. The Apache had the high ground. The soldiers had time in numbers. It was a deadly stalemate. As shadows lengthened, Eleanor heard commotion from the soldier camp, new voices, arguing. Then Richardson called up again. "I've been informed there are women and children among you. Surrender, and I guarantee they will not be harmed. You have 1 hour to decide." The adults gathered to counsel. Some warriors wanted to fight to the end. Others looked at their children and hesitated. Joseph tried to rise, to join the discussion, but Eleanor held him down. "Rest," she commanded. "Let others decide for once." But the decision, when it came, was his to make. The elders, the grandmother, even the warriors who challenged him, they all looked to Joseph. He was not chief, but in this moment, His word would carry weight. Joseph looked at Eleanor, then at the wounded, the children, the women who'd already lost too much. We fight, we die with honor, but the children die too. The future dies. He struggled to sit straighter. I say we take the colonel's word. Surrender. Live to fight another day, another way. Some protested, but the grandmother raised her hand. My grandson speaks wisdom. Dead children cannot grow to reclaim what is taken. We surrender, but we do not bow. Eleanor helped Joseph stand. Together, they prepared to walk down from the rocks, to face whatever came next. As they moved, Joseph whispered to her, You know they will separate us. They'll try, Eleanor corrected. But you taught me something, Joseph. Love isn't just feeling, it's choosing. And I choose you. Choose this, every day until my last day. They emerged from the rocks slowly, proudly, the Apache walking like the undefeated people they were. Eleanor kept her arm around Joseph, supporting him but also declaring to all who watched, This is my place. This is my choice. This is my stand. Richardson's face was stone as they approached. Henderson looked triumphant, already planning Eleanor's grateful rescue story. Neither understood what they were seeing, a woman who'd found herself by losing everything her world said she should be. Mrs. Miller, Richardson said formally, You'll come with us now. We'll see you safely return to your people. Eleanor met his eyes steadily. I'm already with my people, Colonel, and my name is Woman Who Stands Between Mrs. Miller died on the prairie. I choose who I am now. The soldiers moved to separate them then, to take Joseph with the warriors, Eleanor with the rescued white woman. But she held on, fierce and unmovable, until they had to pry her away by force. Even then, her eyes never left Joseph's, her message clear. This is not over. Love is not conquered by separation. I will find my way back to you. As they dragged her toward the wagon that would take her to safety, Eleanor heard Joseph call out in Apache. The soldiers didn't understand, but she did. He was reciting a warrior's vow, usually spoken before battle, but he'd changed it, made it new. I will wait for you as the mountain waits for spring. I will hold you in my heart as the earth holds the seed. You are my choice, my stand, my home. This is my word, and my word is not wind, it is mountain. Eleanor replied in Apache, her accent imperfect but her meaning clear. And I will return like spring returns to the mountain. You are my love, my teacher, my truth. This is my word, and my word is not wind. It is water that always finds its way. Then the wagon rolled away, and the mountain fell behind. But not the promise. Never the promise. Love had been paid for in blood and proven in choice. Now it would be tested by separation. But Eleanor had been empty once and survived. Now she was full of purpose, of love, of the fierce determination to return. The soldiers thought they were rescuing her. They had no idea they were simply transporting a warrior who'd learned that sometimes the greatest battle was simply refusing to surrender who you'd chosen to become. The rescue camp was everything Eleanor had expected and worse. They'd set her up in a tent with 2 missionary women who looked at her like she was diseased. They brought her proper clothes, corsets and layers that felt like prison after months of practical Apache dress. They tried to wash her hair with harsh soap, tutting over how the sun had darkened her skin. You'll be yourself again in no time, Mrs. Whitman assured her, yanking a brush through Eleanor's hair. Once we get you back to civilization, you'll forget all about those savages. Eleanor said nothing. She'd learned that first night that arguing only brought more preaching, more prayers for her corrupted soul. Instead, she waited, watched, planned. The soldiers had taken the Apache to the reservation 40 miles south. Joseph was there, wounded but alive according to the doctor who'd grudgingly treated him. That was all that mattered. Henderson visited daily, spinning tales of her captivity that bore no resemblance to truth. You were so brave, he'd say, patting her hand while she fought not to recoil. Surviving among those beasts. But it's over now. We'll find you a proper situation. Maybe work as a seamstress in town, or housekeeping for a good Christian family. Eleanor bit her tongue until it bled, tasting copper and remembering Joseph's blood on her hands. Every night, she dreamed of the mountains, of running deer's laughter, of Joseph's steady heartbeat under her palm. Every morning, she woke to canvas walls and Christian charity that felt like chains. On the 5th day, Colonel Richardson summoned her. His tent was sparse, military maps spread across a folding table. He gestured for her to sit, studying her with calculating eyes. Mrs. Miller, he began. I need to understand something. You had every opportunity to leave those Indians. Why stay? Eleanor met his gaze. Because I chose to. You chose to live as a savage, to abandon your race, your God, your civilization. I chose to live with people who saw me as human. Eleanor replied, who valued me for more than my usefulness, who taught me that love is an ownership. Richardson leaned back. The Apache warrior. You claim he's your husband. He is. By what authority? What Christian ceremony? Eleanor almost smiled. By Apache ceremony. By choice made before their spirits and mine. By words spoken and meant. That's no marriage in the eyes of God or law. Then God and law are blind, Eleanor said quietly. Because what Joseph and I have is more real than anything blessed in a church. Richardson's face darkened. You're confused. Mrs. Miller, traumatized. These feelings you think you have, they're not real. Stockholm Syndrome. The doctors call it captives who sympathize with their captors. I wasn't captured. I chose... Enough. Richardson stood. You'll be transferred to Fort Laramie tomorrow. From there, back east, if we can find any relations to take you. Otherwise, to an institution that can help women in your condition. Eleanor stood as well. I won't go. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice, Eleanor said. You taught me that, in a way. Every day you keep me here. You choose cruelty over compassion. Every day you keep Joseph and his people penned like animals. You choose power over justice. And every day I stay breathing. I choose to return to him. That night, Eleanor put her plan into motion. She'd watched the camp, learned the guard rotations, identified which horses were fastest. The missionary women slept deeply, aided by the laudanum they took for their nerves. Eleanor slipped from the tent in the darkest hour before dawn. She'd hidden Apache clothing under the wooden floor, had gradually gathered supplies. Now she dressed quickly, braided her hair in the style Running Deer had taught her. She looked like herself again, not the white woman they wanted her to be, but woman who stands between. The horses were the hardest part. Eleanor moved like Joseph had taught her, low and quiet. The guards were lazy, not expecting trouble from within. She'd almost reached the picket line when a voice stopped her. Going somewhere. Eleanor turned to find Dr. Marcus, the field surgeon, watching her with unreadable eyes. Her hand went to the knife at her belt, another thing she'd hidden. Are you going to stop me? She asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I watched you during the battle, he said finally. How you tended the wounded, Apache wounded, with the same care you'd shown the wagon train folks. He paused. My daughter ran off with a Mexican vaquero 5 years ago. Everyone said I should drag her back, save her from herself. I let her go. A slight smile. She writes me letters about her children, her happy life. Sometimes love doesn't look like what we expect. He turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing in shocked silence. Then she moved quickly, saddling the horse, mounting up. As she rode from camp, she heard shouts rising behind her. Let them come. They'd taught her to run toward something instead of away, and she had 40 miles to cover. She rode hard through the dawn, pushing the horse as much as she dared. The landscape flew by, valleys and ridges she'd walked with Joseph, teaching each other their different worlds. By full daylight, she could hear pursuit. They were faster, fresher, but she knew this land now. Eleanor led them on a chase through rough country, using every trick Joseph had taught her about losing trackers. Double back through streams, use rocky ground, create false trails, but they were too many, too determined. As the sun reached its peak, they caught her at a river crossing.
"Mrs. Miller,"
Henderson shouted,
"stop this foolishness. You'll only make things worse."
Eleanor turned the horse to face them, sitting tall in the saddle. "My name is Woman Who Stands Between, and I'm going home." "You're going to an asylum if you keep this up," another man called. "Is that what you want, to be locked away with the lunatics?" "If lunacy means choosing love over your version of sanity, then yes." Eleanor replied, "Lock me away. I'll escape again, and again, as many times as it takes." They surrounded her then, pulled her from the horse. Eleanor didn't fight. That wasn't the battle that mattered. As they bound her hands, she looked each man in the eye. "You think you're saving me," she said, "but you're the ones who need saving. From your fear of different ways of living, from your need to control what you don't understand, from your belief that your way is the only way." They took her back to camp in chains, like a criminal. Richardson was furious. But something in Eleanor's calm acceptance seemed to unnerve him. They couldn't break what wouldn't bend. That evening, as she sat under guard, a commotion arose at the camp's edge, riders approaching under a white flag. Eleanor's heart leaped as she recognized the lead figure, Joseph's grandmother, sitting straight despite her age, accompanied by two warriors. The old woman spoke through an interpreter, her voice carrying the authority of years and loss and survival. "You have one of ours," she said. "Woman Who Stands Between chose us, and we choose her. This is Apache law. Those who choose become family. Family cannot be stolen." "She's a white woman," Richardson protested. "She belongs with her own kind." The grandmother's eyes found Eleanor. What makes someone kind, blood, or choice? This one saved Apache lives, learned Apache ways, stood between death and our people. She is more Apache than some born to it. "The law."
"Your law," the grandmother spat. "We follow older law of the heart, of choice, of standing together. You want to keep her, then you must fight all Apache. We are few, but we are not finished."
Richardson looked between the old woman and Eleanor, calculating. A renewed Indian war over one white woman who'd chosen to go native his superiors would have his head. Eleanor stood, chains clanking. "Colonel, may I speak?" He nodded curtly. "You believe you're civilized and we're savage," Eleanor said, loud enough for all to hear. "But civilization that denies choice, denies love, denies the right to belong where your heart lives. How is that different from savagery? You speak of God and law. But what God demands separation of those who choose each other? What law makes love a crime?" She turned to the grandmother, speaking in Apache. "Thank you for coming, but don't risk war for me. I'll find my way back. Water always finds its way." The grandmother smiled. "See Apache heart? Thinks of people before self." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, unexpected, "Doctor," Marcus stepped forward. "Colonel, might I suggest a compromise? The reservation isn't far. If Mrs. Miller, or whatever she chooses to call herself, wishes to live there, why stop her one less mouth to feed, one less problem to manage?" "She's a white woman," Henderson protested. "It's unnatural." "So is slavery. Yet we fought a war over it." Marcus replied, "If she chooses this life, knowing the hardships, who are we to force her elsewhere?" Richardson clearly wanted to refuse, but Eleanor could see him weighing options. The Apache wouldn't leave without her, that was clear. Fighting them would be messy, politically dangerous. And what would he do with her anyway? Ship her east to be someone else's problem. Fine, he said finally. But understand this, Mrs. Miller. You choose to live as an Apache. You forfeit all rights as a white woman. No protection under our law. No aid from our government. No return to civilization when this fantasy ends badly.
I understand, Eleanor said immediately. I forfeit nothing I value and gain everything that matters.
They struck her chains then, and Eleanor walked free to where the grandmother waited. The old woman touched her face gently. Come, daughter. Joseph waits. He said you would return like spring, and here you are, bringing warmth back to his heart. As they rode toward the reservation, Eleanor looked back once at the camp. Henderson stood watching, confusion written on his face. He would never understand how she could choose hardship over comfort, different over familiar, love over safety. But Marcus raised his hand in farewell, and Eleanor thought perhaps some minds could change, some hearts could open. Not all, not most, but some. And that was how the world shifted. One choice at a time, one person standing between old ways and new possibilities. The reservation was a shadow of freedom, but Joseph was there, healing, waiting. When Eleanor rode in, he was standing outside their assigned shelter, thin but alive, eyes bright with joy and pride. You came back, he said simply. Did you doubt? Never. Water always finds its way. Eleanor dismounted and went to him, not caring who watched or what they thought. She was done with caring about propriety, about the opinions of those who'd never known the emptiness she'd carried or the love that had filled it. They said I can stay, but I forfeit being white. She told him. Joseph smiled. Good trade. You gain being yourself. That night, the Apache held a ceremony. Not a wedding. They were already married in every way that mattered. But a welcoming, a formal adoption. Eleanor became fully what she'd chosen to be, surrounded by people who'd learned to see past her skin to her heart. The reservation was hard. Food was scarce. Freedom limited. Future uncertain. But Eleanor woke each morning beside Joseph, worked alongside running deer, learned from the grandmother. She helped in the makeshift school, teaching Apache children the letters Joseph had taught her, preparing them for a world that would demand they walk between two cultures as she had learned to do. Sometimes soldiers would visit, checking on the white woman who'd gone native. They'd shake their heads at her sun-darkened skin, her Apache dress, her obvious contentment. She'd become a cautionary tale in their world, the woman who'd chosen savage love over civilized emptiness. But in the evenings, when Joseph held her under stars visible through their shelter's smoke hole, Eleanor knew the truth. She hadn't chosen savage over civilized. She'd chosen being seen over being invisible, belonging over being useful, love over emptiness. Do you ever regret? Joseph asked one night. His wound finally healed but scarred, like they all were scarred. Eleanor thought of wagon trains and abandoned homesteads, of Jacob's empty eyes and her father's quick bargain, of years spent trying to become small enough to be loved, quiet enough to be kept. I regret the years I didn't know this was possible, she said, but not the choice. Never the choice. Good, Joseph said, because you are home now, not in this place of fences and guards, but here. He placed his hand over her heart. Home in choosing, home in standing, home in love that sees true. Eleanor covered his hand with hers. Once. She had cried that she'd never known love. Now she lived it, breathed it, chose it every day. Not the fairy tale love of stories, but the real love of two people who'd seen each other's emptiness and chosen to fill it with their presence, their truth, their unwavering stand. Outside, coyotes called across the prairie, and guards walked their rounds, but inside, woman who stands between rested in the arms of the man who'd given her all his love when she'd had none, and knew that some choices, once made, created their own unbreakable laws. The world might call her lost. She knew she was finally found. Shannon. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected love and the courage to choose your own path, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of love, loss, and redemption from America's frontier days. What did Eleanor's journey mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below.